everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome folks on Zoom as well. If you haven't met me yet, I'm Gina Rodriguez and I'm the college counselor here. This is my second year here at Commonwealth. And as I was saying earlier, 1 year under the belt, going a lot smoother. It's great. The juniors will be my third cohort, which is exciting. Yes, happy eve of midterms for all of you and your students. I know they're going into a stressful time, which is part of why we start this conversation with parents now and students after midterms. So a couple of your kiddos and classmates have come with, questions about summer, questions about testing and things like that, but they really haven't seen too much of me yet or heard too much from me. That said, Theo and I should also introduce Theo. Theo Paul, who some of your kids have had as a math teacher, who you may or may not know, was also college counselor here at Commonwealth for how many years?
Oh my goodness, 7 or 8 years, 7 or 8 years ago.
So awesome to have Theo help me, especially last year, but as you can see, continuing to be support, which is so appreciated.
So, one request to speak closer to the mic.
Yes, which is here, I think. Is this any better? Maybe if I just shout louder. So, okay. I will also speak up. So Theo and I have also just switched to being class advisors for your students as well in the junior class. So starting now, they will see both of us at least weekly. I don't know, Theo, if there's a way to turn the doorbell.
I was just looking into that.
Yeah. So they will see us at least weekly on Tuesdays during class meetings. And that's a nice kind of low-key time for them to ask questions. But as we get into February, they will start to see a lot of me, and I'll be starting one-on-one meetings with them and getting to know them and what they're thinking about college. And if they're not yet, maybe start that ball rolling a little bit. But tonight, many of you saw me at back to school night back in the fall. So tonight is that follow-up to say, okay, we talked about an overview a little bit, but what does that actually look like, especially for this year and over the course of the summer? And then we'll do a Zoom version of this in the fall, saying, okay, we're now seniors. What does that look like? Hi, come on. Okay. Yeah, and they're on chairs as well.
Oh,
thanks. And please help yourself. Drink some cookies and drinks. Good to see you. So, as I said, what we're going to be talking about tonight is first thinking about our guiding focus. So, what are your goals and your family's goals for this process? Overview of all the things that we do to support your students here at Commonwealth through the process. What that timeline looks like on month-to-month basis, like I said, through the spring and summer. What does supporting your student care look like in the middle grade? Naviance, which some of you who might have some older students have seen before, and taking a look at that, and then takeaways and next steps. Okay, so our guiding focus. So I ask you all to just take a moment, think for yourself, what is your goal for your child's college process, right? For some of us, that might be, I've heard terrible things about this process. I just want it to be painless and over quickly. Totally fine. For some of us, that might be, I really want my student to find a place where they can really blossom and come out of their shell. Or, for our family, financial piece of it is really top priority, and we want to make sure they get in somewhere where we are sure we can afford 4 years, right? Or it might be, hey, we know what it looks like out there and we want them to get into the most selective college that they can, right? So think for a moment, or there could be, hundreds of other possible answers to this. You might find that your answer to this is different than the person you came here with. or possibly different than the goal that your child sets for themselves too, right? So worth coming up with your answer and then having that conversation at home. I'm not going to ask you to shout it out now. Okay, so a little bit of an overview. Certainly lots of individualized supports and guidance. This is, again, just a couple examples. Personalized college list, that's something that we're really going to be focusing on this spring. Interview prep, that's more of a summer fall project. And full application review, of course, right? So not just essays and supplements and the activities list and the Common App and all these pieces, but also what does that look like as a whole, and lots of other things. Group supports, like college seminar. So in the fall, your students will be actually scheduled a class weekly with me where our focus is, let's get these college apps done, right? So that really focuses on all the things that we can have in small group discussions, right? So, okay, we're reading a supplement. What does that really mean? Like, what are they looking for when they ask this question? Or thinking about, again, a whole semester's worth of things. So college seminar is a great small group time where, again, they continue to see me weekly there and in class meetings. Also, please shout if you have questions. On Zoom, please type in the chat. If you have a question, Theo will relay it here in the room. Should have started with them. Other group supports, essay workshops. So we're going to have one here in May, probably on a Saturday, details to come. That really gets the ball rolling with essays with me and maybe some other help, wink, wink, nod, nod. And helping students brainstorm topics of what that personal essay might be, what the structure looks like, you know, what are good topics or bad topics, and getting that ball rolling before they start to meet with their essay advisors. Test prep, we'll talk about this a little bit as well, but we do have, just like we have PSAT test prep in the fall, we also have SAT test prep here coming up in the spring, totally optional, but offered. And lots of other ways that we support kiddos in a group setting. As I mentioned, dedicated essay advisors. So coming up this spring, I'll be asking all the students to name 3 teachers that they think might be a good match with them for their personal essay. Writing a personal essay is really personal, right? Often the students are trying to figure out, okay, you know, what is the thing about me, the story I want to tell about myself to all of these colleges. It really takes a teacher that they feel comfortable working with to get to that and then revise it and then revise it again and then revise it again. So students will be guaranteed to get one of those 3 teachers that they select as their essay advisor. Like I said, that person starts to work with them here in the spring, continues to work with them through the summer and then through the fall as well, working not only on that personal essay, but also on supplements and all that good stuff. Recommendation letters. There's often a lot of questions around recommendation letters, and we'll get to that a little bit later too. But what I really want to emphasize is that our teachers know how to write a really strong rec letter, right? We pair students and teachers up so that teachers feel really confident that they have a great story to tell about each student for each letter that they write. They are unique, personalized, individualized, and colleges often comment to me how strong the rec letters are from Commonwealth. Again, this is my 2nd year. When I came in last year, I was really blown away by the level of personalization that the teachers write for students. It's pretty incredible. And then relationships with colleges. So like I said, colleges mentioned to me. In the fall, we have usually around 50 to 60 colleges actually come to visit. So students will of course be able to meet one-on-one, often not one-on-one, in small group settings, sometimes one-on-one if no other students come. Usually with the rep that will be reading their application, right? So that's a really awesome time for them to make that connection with that person, especially if that college does not offer interviews or other ways for them to make that impression with the rep. Yeah.
What percentage of schools actually do interview these days.
Yeah.
Seems to be something that's fallen off a lot.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's in decline. However, the ones that, the interviews that we see now are mostly non-evaluative, so informational interviews. We still see a benefit from those, even though they are not technically being evaluated. And we see more interviews that are only offered to applicants, so not prospects, right? So you might not be able to interview in the summer or fall, but once that application comes in, all of a sudden in your portal, would you like to schedule an interview? So there are still some that have it kind of behind that application wall.
And are there trends that show that those are being done more by alumni than admission staff?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I can't give you numbers off the top of my head, but anecdotally, definitely more alumni. Feedback usually gets relayed. And again, even if your school does offer an interview, it might be an informational interview with an alum. Getting to meet your college rep when they come and visit is always a great addition to that. The other thing I will say on the interview side is that we're seeing colleges go towards a optional introductory video. I am not yet trained in videography and movie making, but that is becoming more and more of something that we are doing as part of the college process. So again, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but something to be aware of and that you'll see on more college websites is an introductory video, which is often replacing an interview. So students are asked to basically think of them in a similar way. Awesome. All right, so thinking about our timeline. Starting now, like I said, students are going into midterms. They're not going to hear too much from me until after midterms. And then we're going to be into February before we know it. So as soon as we get back from midterms, they really dive right in. They're going to get access to a Google Classroom, just like they have with all their other classes, where I'm going to share lots of resources, everything from, don't forget SAT, ACT deadlines are coming up to, hey, check out this list of cool schools with, attributes that you don't know about. In the spring, there's usually lots of college fairs, so I try to advertise them on there, scholarship things, so all sorts of stuff, including the junior questionnaire. So the junior questionnaire will go out and basically ask students almost all the things that they're going to get asked on their applications, right? So it's a nice primer to say, oh yeah, what are all the activities or summer internships that I've done? Using that, I then meet with them, have a conversation, like I said, introductory conversation, using some of that info, get to know them, start thinking about what colleges might be on that list. Around this time too, students and families are thinking about, okay, how do we utilize some of that March break time to maybe visit some schools? Talk about that in a second. Again, begin exploring some colleges. Parent college questionnaire, there's a paper version. In that handout at the back, there's also an online through the parent portal. This is always a nice way to get a little insight from you all, right? We often see one side of your student here at school. It's nice to get a little glimpse of what, charming things that they share with you all at home. Students and parents register on Naviance, so I'll be sharing, sending out an email with registration info to you all and to students. The one thing I want to emphasize there is you as parents will have your own login info to log in as parents. Students will have their own. Really, the only difference is that students can add and remove colleges, but you can't. You can see everything. You can see the status of each piece, all that good stuff. Again, we'll get into that when we jump into Naviance here in a minute, but that's the only difference. And it's helpful if you log in as a parent and students log in as students. As I mentioned before, the optional SAT prep course, we really find that it's most helpful for students that on their PSAT scored below a 700 on one section or the other. Above a 700, if a student is still looking for additional help, chat with me. This course might not be the best additional support, but happy to talk with you or your student about what might be. The other thing I do want to mention about that prep course as well is that our teachers are right now in the midst of getting updated so that they can give you the students, the most recent information on preparing for the digital SAT, which is of course the only option. March. If possible, take March SAT or April ACT. If your student is going abroad, I know the France trip overlaps with the March SAT. No worries, there's June, there's May, it's fine. But we just find that most students will take their first one in March or first ACT in April. And that kind of gives a nice gauge to see, okay, do I want to take it again in the spring, or do I feel okay maybe waiting till August or later in the summer to take it for the second time? And then of course, there's not a lot of school in March. There's a fair amount of spring break, and that is a nice time to go on some of those college visits. You might be thinking, how will we know what schools we should visit by March, right? The March visit should really have a main primary goal of seeing a variety of types of schools, right? Not necessarily the specific schools that your students are going to apply to. See a big school, see a small school, see a research school, see a liberal arts school, right? See if your student identifies as a woman, see an all women's college, right? See, I don't know, other varieties of schools, right? So the idea is to get a sense for your student of, oh, this is the kind of place where I could see myself at, right? Maybe I like a place that's more like Commonwealth, a little bit smaller, a little bit more tight knit, or actually, whoa, did you see that lab in this gigantic R1 research university? That's so cool, right? So trying to gauge what direction might they want to go. This often pairs well with, if you're traveling to see family over March break, most places that you're going to go will have a variety of schools. If you're staying home, Boston certainly has a variety of schools to visit. All right, so we get into April.
Just a quick question
Please.
about that. Since some of the colleges, actually a large number of the colleges,
Yep.
spring breaks overlap with Commonwealth spring breaks.
Yep.
I've noticed that many times there are no tours available.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
So thoughts are, you're not wrong. Certainly that can happen. A lot of times, I will say sometimes there are still tours happening because admissions officers don't always get a spring break like the rest of the school. Regardless, there might not be that many students on campus, right? So it's still a different experience. We don't have college visit days set aside for students in junior spring. We do in the fall. I think it's still nice to be able to get on campus if you can. One of the benefits of visiting, if it ends up being a school that your student does find themselves interested in applying to, if you show up at a campus and you walk around, but you don't do an official tour, you don't do an official info session, maybe there's not one available, but you kind of show yourself around, which at this point, colleges are mostly letting folks do again. And then you go home, they're not going to know you were there, right? It can be beneficial for them to know you were there. So I always say follow up with an email. I'm happy to connect students with the right contact there. Follow up with an email and say, hey, I visited over your spring break. I really love the campus. If there's some way for me to chat with you on Zoom or with a current student on Zoom, right? Demonstrating that interest and that excitement and letting them know, hey, we made that trip out there. FYI, please mark that in my file.
Yeah, and for that,
Please.
first couple of visits, I found, talking to kids when they would visit one or two schools, they would go into those visits really having no idea what they were looking for, what they were interested in. And even if it was over spring break and there wasn't much going on campus, they would still get a sense and still start to form opinions about what, you know, what they saw that they want to look for in other schools. And it was really a nice time for them to just kind of get the most basic sense of what kind of things they value, and for them to sort of start forming opinions about what they want to look for in future visits.
Yeah, no, thank you, Thea, that's a great point. Which also reminded me that as part of that handout is a student like college tour questionnaire. Especially if you pack a bunch into spring break, like a third or fourth or fifth one, you start to say, wait, which one had a really nice student center and which one had that quad area that we liked? They don't believe me when I tell them this, but yes, they do all run together and you forget which one was which. I really recommend taking some notes, taking some pictures, so that you can go back and revisit and say, yeah, this was what I liked about that. Yeah, helpful for them when they're reflecting on those visits and thinking, what are those pieces that I liked and what I didn't like. Also helpful when they potentially put in an application and have to answer why this school.
Question in the chat, can you just show up for a college visit, or do you have to schedule an appointment?
Yeah, so ideally you can schedule ahead. I would say, especially over spring break, if they are offering visits, they might fill up quickly. So going onto their admissions website, they'll have some kind of area where you can sign up for a tour or sign up for a admissions info session. So that's ideally to go that route. But often if you show up, there's also an opportunity to kind of join a tour day of. But if they're full, you kind of lose out on that. Yeah. Okay, so April. Then we do that reflection, right? Meet again, how did it go? What do we like? What did we not like? The college list is iterative, right? We start with a long list, much longer than what your student should be thinking about applying to. And then we start to say, okay, let's pare this down, right? And oh, we liked this one. Well, maybe let's add these two others and check those out, right? So once we get to that, that's what I'll say is nothing is written in stone, especially this early in the process. It's about exploring and trying some different things on for size. In April, they also start meeting with their essay advisor. Again, mentioned that it is an assignment, but they will get someone that they have selected, one of those 3 teachers that they selected that they'd like to. Not a lot of actual essay writing often happens before the end of the year, but at least starting to get some wheels turning. In May then, continue thinking about summer visits, again, as that college list continues to iterate and as you as a family figure out what is happening over the summer, you know, what kind of awesome things your kids are doing over the summer. May is also AP season. I do not find that more is always better with APs, so happy to strategize with your students on that and talk through what makes the most sense, both for this process, also for their well-being in May. Attend a college essay workshop, send essay thoughts and notes to your essay advisor. So as I mentioned, it'll likely be a Saturday in May. We'll spend a couple hours together starting to brainstorm some of those ideas and get the ball rolling a little bit. There'll also be a book, college essay guide, that I use to guide that, and that then they can take with them, which is helpful over the summer to refer back to. We will chat about the college list. My goal this year is to use Naviance as our main place for that, so that I and students and you all can log in at any time and see a current updated list on Naviance. One way that we talk about the list is through about 3 categories, right? So those likely schools, those schools that we expect the student will probably get a positive response from, those target schools that are often around that 50-50 mark, saying this is a really good match, but it's still a little up in the air, right? Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did. And then those reach schools, right? Often those are the schools that no matter who you are, they're going to be a hard school to get into. So I mentioned this because one drawback on Naviance is that it doesn't let me indicate to you all and to the students where I would place each of those. So it just involves a little extra communication. If possible, attend NACAC College Fair. They do this annually down here at the Convention Center. As I mentioned, there's lots of college fairs in the springtime. Boston Independent Schools actually hosts one as well. I think it's going to be end of April. More info to come on that. But lots of fun college fairs, and I would say NACAC as well as the Boston Independent Schools one are probably the top two. All right, June. June is somehow already into summer, but we do a couple things in the final few days of school with, I think with the calendar this year, this really ends up being the very last week of May. But final spring meeting with your essay advisor, final spring meeting with me, you know, talking about, okay, what is that plan for the summer? Where are we visiting? And with essay advisor, how many times are we meeting and on what platform? What are the expectations for back and forth, especially on that personal essay? Then July and August, a lot of that writing should be getting completed. Again, this is really between the student and the essay advisor, and I come in when there's extra questions that the essay advisor isn't sure about, but that's very rare. College Essay Essentials, that's the book I was referring to earlier. So having that one handy is always good through that process too. I also put out closer to the summer, a summer to-do list for students to make sure that they're really on track to hit the ground running in September. September and October fly like this, and many students will have application deadlines on November 1st. So getting as much of this writing done over the summer really allows them to breathe a little bit in September and October, even though it'll still be busy no matter what. Questions on timeline here? Or on Zoom?
My student asked me about schools that require students to declare what their area of study would be.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that? Are there certain profiles of schools, certain regions where they're located? What are sort of tells that we should be paying attention to make sure we don't overlook that?
Yeah, so stop me if I'm not answering your question. So certainly some schools will ask a student to declare a major or program of interest as part of the application process, right? They're saying you are applying into this major or into this college, and we are evaluating you based on that choice. That is not the majority of schools. However, the majority of schools do ask, what is your program of interest, in a non-binding, but we'd like to know kind of way. Students should follow their passions. I say that, I know it sounds very but it's true, right? They're likely their application will likely show that they have done those things that they're interested in, that they're often good at the things that they're interested in, right? And will lead them to an application that makes sense for that major. Am I making sense? So for example, if a student says, you know, I think I really love political science, right? That's the direction I want to go. Usually that doesn't come out of nowhere. Usually that student has done lots of humanities classes here. They have done, you know, town representative meetings in their community. They have done some kind of political science summer camp for 3 summers in a row, right? And so if they say, oh, well, this is the most competitive political science program in the nation, so I'm just gonna apply undecided. It still reads like a political science application.
I was gonna say that's going more in the direction of the question, which is more if the student is a little bit more undecided.
Yeah.
And let's say, for example, some of the schools within the spectrum of their area of interest.
Yeah.
There may be a very clear path. I mean, I'll use STEM as the big bucket, but there may be a clear STEM path, maybe in terms of an engineering school. But if that same student is, say, interested also maybe potentially either or in math or chemistry or another one of the hard sciences, are there recommendations in that respect? It's a little bit, it particularly with some of the schools where it's really clearly delineated with the programs,
Yeah.
It's harder to discern kind of how to navigate that.
Yes, it is. So that really comes back to those individual conversations because it's gonna vary student to student and college to college. Yeah, depending on how they're reading for those programs.
Question in the chat.
Yeah.
How do you adjust college list if there are significant changes to grades or scores as time elapses, particularly if this happens in the fall?
You adjust as needed. I would say a couple things to note is that first grades that go to colleges are the end of junior year. So the first transcript that gets sent in the fall has no senior grades on it at all. Shortly thereafter, usually the middle of November, I think it was November 17th this year, 15th, right around there. We calculate for students that for seniors, they get a November grade. We'll talk about this in more detail in the fall because this was honestly last year when it was my first year, I was like, you guys do what now? But students still get that quarter grade in October, but it does not get sent anywhere. That's for their own feedback. And then they have the opportunity to make changes in their classes and classwork as needed for the next about 3 weeks. Then we recalculate a cumulative grade in the middle of November, and that will be the first set of grades that get sent out to schools. In that time, there might be some shifts in the college list, but just to note, there's probably not going to be a shift in, well, there won't be if there is a November 1 early decision application sent. That will have been locked in by that point. If there are major changes in September and October of grades for seniors, we'll have that conversation. I was a little all over the place. Let me know if there's follow-up. All right. So, question we get asked a lot is kind of who does what, right? One thing is that really students should be leading this process. It is them going to college. Some of us, some days myself included, would say, oh, that sounds great. I'm gonna go to London for my first year and then go do this and then go do that. It sounds awesome. But it's not me, it's them. So really students should be driving this process, right? We expect them to be giving timely attention to all the tests and the deadlines throughout the process, starting when we come back after midterms, right? But of course, those deadlines become a lot more critical as we get into senior fall. Ask lots of questions, listen with an open mind, be honest, and be self-resilient, right? There are times when we try to push students a little bit, especially in this process, to say, hey, you're planning to be a pretty independent college student really soon. How might you go about finding that answer, right? Creating a realistic and well-balanced college list to ensure availability of options. This gets back to what I was talking about, having those likely, target, and reach schools, right? So a well-balanced list means having some of each of those. Most of our students do have 2 or 3 of those pretty reachy schools on that list. And that's okay, that's fine. As long as they've also got some to balance out, maybe on the more likely side. Really my goal is also for all of those schools to be schools that your student is excited about, right? The idea should be like, yes, that school that has a very high rejection rate, sounds really awesome, sounds really fun, but so does this other school that I really think that I'm gonna get into, right? And so do all these schools in the middle that, yeah, I think I'll get a handful of those to come my way too, right? So really doing research and making sure that list is pretty well balanced, and that they're enthusiastic about it across the board. This comes back to the question of, kind of the major piece as well, right? Continue to do all those things that you're excited about as a student. This is not usually something that we have to encourage Commonwealth students to do. If anything, I say, do you sleep at night? You do a lot of things. Are you good? But continuing to do that through senior year even too. And always open line of communication. I'm glad this year, actually, my office is right around the corner here. So very accessible to students. And I'm saying this to you as, to ensure that I will continue to be there next year. All right. So then what do we do as adults as part of this process, right? Parents and guardians and families, right? Encouraged to also listen and keep an open mind and respect their child's choices. This can be hard and should, of course, be balanced with families' needs, right? Especially when there's financial aspect, which anytime we're talking about college, there is. Modeling good behavior, right? That means allowing them to really take the lead on this. Sometimes that means encouraging them to say, why don't you ask your advisor about that? Why don't you ask Ms. Rodriguez about that? But letting them be the one to ask. Continuing to stay positive, constructive, being equally, if not more excited about those schools across the spectrum on their list. And then always reaching out to me. I am available, email, Zoom, in person, come hang out. I really encourage you to reach out to me. Even if you don't have a question, I often am happy. I'm always happy, but often utilized for setting up a Zoom call just to maybe release some stress before a student gets home. Happy to do that. And then what do we do on our side here? Like I said, individualized attention and support, of course, meeting students, scheduled meetings, but also part of being handy right here on the second floor is that I get lots of like pop-ins for teenagers. When a thought comes to them, you kind of have to be available and ready because otherwise it keeps going. Expert knowledge and insight into the college admissions process. And of course, this is my whole career, right? I am dedicated to doing this. I am doing my best as things continue to change almost daily on the college landscape to keep updated with all the things and how they're going to impact our Commonwealth students. Of course, assistance developing that college list and shifting lists if the need arises. Guidance on tasks and deadlines. As I mentioned, again, setting up that Google Classroom is a really helpful way for me to ping them all as a group and seeing them in class meetings and then in the fall, also in college seminar. And then continue to communicate to them and to you all throughout the process. Okay, we're gonna jump into Naviance. I apologize to those.
Gina, quick question from the chat.
Oh, please.
Can you share how current seniors did in the EDEA round this year?
They did very well. We had more, so not all EA is in yet, but looking at only ED1, we had more ED1 acceptances than average. So we did well.
Sorry, what does ED1 mean? Early decision?
Early decision 1, yes.
And what is the 1?
So some schools also have early decision 2. So just a quick rundown. Early decision is binding agreement. If your student chooses to apply early decision 1 or 2, they sign a document, you sign a document, I sign a document, all saying, we understand this is a binding agreement. If the student is accepted, we expect them to enroll and withdraw all other applications. Early action is, oh, and the other piece with early decision is that they find out earlier too, right? For ED1, they find out usually mid-December. Early action, you get the same benefit of hearing back early, but it's not binding, which is always helpful. So UMass Amherst, that we're going to actually take a look at in Naviance here shortly, does early action. Many of our students use that as one of their likely options, and it's always nice to hear back just a little bit sooner that you've got one in your pocket. Some schools have ED1 and ED2, so that means usually a November 1 deadline, and then also a January 1 deadline. So ED2 means that either the student wasn't ready to make a binding commitment in November, or potentially they didn't get the answer that they had hoped from their ED1 school. You can't apply to the same school ED2, but you can apply to maybe your second choice, or maybe you had a few that really right up there top notch for you. So it's really about timing. Yes.
So can you elaborate on your response? You said better than average. Is that for Commonwealth? Is that across applications for independent schools? Is it across the entire population?
Sure.
Can you maybe quantify?
Yeah,
What-
so I hesitate to give specific percentages at this point in the year, just because we're still waiting on more
But can
early
you
action.
define what you
But
mean
yes,
by better
it's
than
within Commonwealth,
within Commonwealth? Okay.
which Commonwealth usually does well across other schools, right? So doing well for us is pretty good. Cool. Other questions or?
Nope.
Great. Okay. So again, sorry, those of you on Zoom who are getting a close-up of me right now. All right. So jumping into Naviance, like I said, Naviance, you'll get sent an email directly from Naviance with registration information, and then you'll be able to log in. We already have kind of very basic student info on Naviance, including PSAT scores, and if they have taken an SAT scores, which most of them have not yet, but that'll continue to be updated as scores get released to us. Let's take a look. So I am logging in as our wonderful student, I'm a mermaid. And she's gonna help us out walking through Naviance. On Zoom, I'm gonna stand over here, so just let me know if you can't hear me. Okay. So Naviance is a really helpful tool for especially organization of this process. You can, and I'll show you, kind of search and discover different kinds of schools, as well as, you know, quick, easy way to find some fast facts. All that said, it's not the college application Bible, right? Compare your sources, go to the college's websites, all that good stuff too. Awesome. I will also say this is not where we mostly communicate to students. Like I said, I see them in person lots of times, and we have Google Classroom, so I don't use this too much for announcements. Okay. So just taking a look at some of the helpful tools that we do utilize in Naviance. I like the Supermatch college search. And Ima was in here earlier today, starting her search because she's really on top of it. And so what you can see here is this is a relatively new Naviance feature where you can search by all these different location, academics, admission, et cetera, et cetera. And then within those, lots of different kinds of features, right? So that you can narrow down what kind of school you might be looking for. So I'm put in some must-haves criteria that she was looking for. The major, institution type, acceptance rate, And she wanted someplace that's gonna take her AP credits. So what this spit out for her then was 59 institutions that are both an academic match and also fit all the criteria above. So the academic match is pulling the GPA and SAT scores that I put in for IMA, that IMA worked very hard for. And saying, okay, based on this information, here's a set of schools that probably gonna fall in that target range. And fit all the things that you want to have, okay? You can see there's gonna be some on here. IMA did well. I don't know if IMA did this well for Harvard to show up. So take it with a grain of salt. She might say, okay, Barnard, I'm interested in all women's college. I like New York. That's pretty cool. She favorited it. Awesome.
You know, I'll just add, this is a really kind of fun way for kids to generate lists of schools they've never heard of.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of schools around here, and particularly highly selective schools that our kids have heard of that just kind of get batted around. But if you asked our average 11th grader about Claremont McKenna, they would probably say, I've never heard of that, where is it? And so this is a great way for kids to just get kind of a most basic sense of like, oh, there's all these places out there that I've never heard of that Commonwealth kids, you know, don't talk about very frequently. And what are those places? And maybe I should go give those a look too.
And what schools are not in this database? None? Like including international?
Yeah,
Yeah,
everywhere's here, because this is also the platform that we as schools use to submit all of their application material as well. So this works both on the back end on the school side. It communicates with the Common App, and it communicates electronically with every college that's not on the Common App. So almost, I have never come across even any international university that's not in NAPCAS.
Yeah, that's including not even just kind of like PU schools, but yeah, across the board. Good to know. So IMA generated some matches here, and now she's gonna go back and see. These are the colleges I'm thinking about. This little heart means they're the same as her favorites. Great. She's already thinking about some schools. This is also where I can add schools as the counselor to say, here are some schools you might want to be thinking about. And where we'll be doing some of those iterations of the college list, right? Is through this colleges I'm thinking about page. So IMA's added a few different schools here. She can select her level of interest in each of those schools. It will auto-generate deadlines as well. This is still looking at this year's senior class, but it'll of course update in the spring. So because I mentioned UMass Amherst earlier, let's jump in and take a look at what their profile looks like. So based on IMA's stats with GPA and SAT score, UMass Amherst algorithm says, this is a student we'd like to apply. Let's get them into our application funnel. So some schools will pop up like this for students and they can start to receive lots of emails from them. If a school tracks demonstrated interest, and I'll talk about this, of course, with students as well, this is not a bad idea. They sometimes will track to the level of, did you open our emails? Did you click on our links? So, but I would say, don't just click on this for every single school, because then your inbox is full of all this stuff. But if you're interested and you want to learn more, and maybe you want to join some of those webinars, this is a nice quick way to get connected with them. Okay, so all these schools have, of course, their homepage, and right on the homepage, some of those quick facts that students and parents are often looking for. Average net price, this is all info that you would also find on the college's website, right? That's where it's pulling it from. It is directly inputted by the school itself. Information like this, maybe I was doing a little bit better than that. Right, that you can adjust based on information that you want to see. To note here, I get this question often, the acceptance rate on this page, as I said, is the national. It would be the same thing that you would find on the college website. So this is not specific to Commonwealth. Other quick facts, it can link you right out to the website, gives you their little blurb, any codes and other info that might be helpful. You get some more information on, what does it look like to be a student there? 91% retention rate is pretty good. Top areas of study, lots of business and pre-med students. Majors and minors offered, right? Students can dig into all this kind of info right from Naviance. Similarly, student life. How big is it? What kind of city is it in or not in? And interestingly, it calculates how far it is from Commonwealth, if that's an important factoid. And then some nice colorful charts as well. Then we get into admissions, which is usually, or I should say often, where students jump right into to get some additional facts. Again, this is all of that national data here at the top, but as we scroll down, this is the scattergram for applications from Commonwealth School. So all of those are an application from Commonwealth. The lines give you the averages. So here's our average GPA of accepted students and average SAT score of accepted students. Note that that's obviously also skewed by what we sent, right? The blue, the blue little person there is Ima. So if Ima was not dead center on this, she might show up above, below, left, or right of that pile, and that would give a little bit of an indication of like, okay, maybe this is going to be a little bit more of a reach school for Ima, or maybe, yeah, we think that one's going to be in that likely pile. Give you a sense also the key here down below. The legend is her, accepted with the check mark, and then waitlisted, and then accepted, waitlisted, unknown, waitlisted, denied, or straight denied. Almost students do pretty well at UMass.
So
Yeah.
this is only case for UMass, right?
Yeah.
So for other schools, same thing, you will be able to see all the Commonwealth students in the past?
Yep.
Okay, great.
It's the last 5 years.
Yes, so thank you. That's what I was just gonna say too. This is only the last 5 years. Mainly because if you go much beyond that, it's not that relevant anymore, right? The application game changes that quickly. They're really the past 5 years gives you a better sense of where you might stand. 10 years ago, some schools would look a lot more optimistic than they would.
Question in the chat.
Yeah.
Should students use their free score reports for the March SAT, or do you think it's too early in the process to be doing that?
Yeah, so the SAT charges you to send scores to schools. College Board, who owns the SAT and also AP, charges students for everything, to be frank. However, they say you can send 4 for free if you send them when you're registering or up to the Wednesday before the exam. So before you see your scores. It's risky, right? Maybe you say, yes, send it. And then you get a cold, or, you feel miserable that day and you don't do that well, or you spill your water bottle on your test, or who knows what. And the score doesn't end up being where you expect. You've already sent them. The other piece of it is that most colleges not all, but the vast majority, accept, because they know that it costs money to send them scores, accept a self-reported score. So in the Common App, there's a section that says, please put in your SAT score. And the student says, this is my SAT score. Most colleges will say, great. That doesn't cost anything beyond the cost of the application. Where if they decide to enroll, we'll then want to confirm that information. But that's just one SAT score send versus sending it to, say, 10 schools that a student is applying to. So I typically say, unless you know you're applying to a school that will require you to send official scores for every test you take, maybe don't take the risk.
Yeah, certainly not once this one.
Awesome. The other couple pages on Naviance that I think are helpful, college visits. Not a lot to see right here, but in the fall, and really in August, when I start scheduling these, they will show live what we have scheduled here. And even if, so as Theo mentioned, this is also how we communicate with colleges, is through Naviance. Most of them sign up with us through this platform, and even the ones that don't, I still add it here, so they're all here. So always helpful to know. You can also always check this on the parent side if you're like, I wonder who's coming to Commonwealth this week. And then where is it? College resources. This is just a helpful place to find links to all of the most popular college links that you're looking for. I know that's kind of tiny on here. See, oh, there we go. A little bit bigger. Common App, Coalition app, you may or may not have heard of, but it's basically a different version of the Common App. Naviance talks directly to Common App, so most of our students, really all of them, primarily use Common App. Also links out to other helpful websites, pages, FAFSA, CSS profile, all the financial aid things, Federal Student Aid Estimator. I definitely recommend doing those just to get a sense of what that financial aid package might look like down the line. Test prep, fairtest.org is a website that shows you all those schools that don't require SAT. Maybe testing is not your student's strong point. We'll talk more about what implications of not sending a test might be too. ACT and SAT. Athletics. No. One student, so I am only a junior, but once students start to add schools to their Common App, because Naviance and Common App talk to each other, they will be able to link those two, and it will pull the schools that they have on their Common App list and populate them here. You will then be able to log into this and see it says pending or it says submitted or whatever stage it is in, right? As Theo mentioned, this is also then how, once things are submitted or signed, we can sign the ED agreements here. I also send all the recommendation letters through here, et cetera, et cetera. You can see it's asking Ima to match this account with her Common App. Awesome. Questions about Naviance at this point, or anything that I missed that I should have talked about?
May I ask, how many colleges end up students will apply?
Yeah.
I know it started like a longer list, short, so I just want to know what's the idea, how many schools?
Yeah. So we average right under 10 usually, 9 point something. That's really a pretty good number, right? So I would say 8 to 12 ends up being that sweet spot, with a couple exceptions being that there are some applications like the University of California system. That's one application for a bunch of schools, right? So I kind of count that as one. Right, or some other pieces like that, but for the most part, the idea of keeping it to a tight 10 is that they can really spend the time to make those applications strong. So that more of those are positive decisions, right? Like, can you do I'm going to apply to 20 schools and see what happens? You can. But we find that that tends to be more weaker applications, right? Because so many of these schools now have 2, 3, 4 supplemental essays for each application. Right now, if you times that by how many schools, it's a lot, right? And we know that Commonwealth classes aren't easy to keep doing also senior year. And I heard it this year and I heard it last year, that students are surprised that senior year is still really hard. And now you have college applications on top of it. So part of the reason of keeping it kind of to that 8 to 12 is to make those a strong set of applications, right? Students should also be able to then articulate, like, why are those schools on the list, right? I've looked into them, I've visited the ones that I can, like, I know what I'm talking about here, I know why I like it. Yeah.
SAT versus ACT, do students choose to take one or do some take both?
Yeah, students typically do not take both officially. However, I do recommend trying to do the practice test of each, because while most of our Commonwealth students will take the SAT and will take it a couple times, we found that students that opt for the ACT actually score on average higher comparatively. So this year, we partnered with Compass Education Group, who is, they have a version of the digital SAT practice test, which is really helpful, because I don't have that. And they have a version of the ACT. So students they have a link to this already to register and take a practice test of each of those for free whenever they want. Ideally this month, because then it will set them up to decide if they want to take that SAT prep class as well. So it's a rambling answer to most students take the SAT, but I definitely recommend SAT or ACT. It gives you the opportunity to study and take it again. Switching back and forth does not usually improve scores either way. Pick one, stick with it. I would say students typically take whichever of those tests about 3 times. Often twice junior spring and once either late summer, early fall. Anything else in ambiance that you can think of?
No, one more question.
Sure.
Talk about when the students sign up like tour or related to the college thing, and they'll send a lot of the emails. I'm curious, as students normally use the Commonwealth email address or the personal, just create an account to just.
Yeah, it's a mixture. I would say maybe more often they use the personal accounts for all of that kind of stuff, but it's up to them. Doesn't make too much difference.
Okay.
Yeah, because by this time of senior year, right, or really a few weeks from now, when students are getting decisions and enrolling, then the college says, oh, you are now, Jane student at university.edu email. And then all the communications go through that anyway. So it's kind of whatever works best for them organization wise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. All right. Jump back to our slideshow here.
One quick question
Yeah.
on just the college selection. Like if there are some international schools that they're trying to get a sense of, like sometimes you can't visit some of these schools. So is there any help from?
Yeah, so couple things. So we are partnered with UK Admissions, which is a site that is specifically for especially the schools that are on the UCAS application system. And so we have an expert there, Gary, he's a great guy, who is not only really helpful and knowledgeable about the process, also has open like Zoom hours every Tuesday. So parents could also pop into there and ask questions. Outside of the UCAS system, we don't necessarily have formal structures set up. I will say lots of students apply to schools in Canada as well. So I consider that kind of part of my domain. Yeah, happy to help students with those applications. For other applications, you know, maybe a student falls in love with a school in Italy, for example, happy to explore that with them and learn alongside them.
Just a quick question going back to SAT and ACT.
Sure.
Do schools accept both, or are there some schools that only accept one?
No, they accept both. And I will also say with COVID, post-COVID, whatever this time we are in, more and more schools, or I should say many schools at this point are SAT optional to a degree. We saw this year a few schools go back to requiring testing. So when I say SAT optional, testing optional, a couple more go back. Probably next year for this class, there'll be a couple more that go back. But there are more schools really than ever that are optional. I don't always find optional to be the most advantageous for Commonwealth students. So worth having a conversation about if you're thinking about it. But yeah, schools, if they want to send a test,
Sorry, what do you mean by that? But not by you recommend that they submit.
yeah, typically. Usually the assumption is worse than the reality if they don't send one.
Because of the school.
We tend to have pretty high scores, both SAT and ACT. And so students sometimes forget that Commonwealth average is not applications of broader average, right? Like even if they're on the lower end of Commonwealth, they're probably still really competitive more broadly. But yes, if a student says, oh no, the SAT is awful. Also, I love the science section in the ACT. Those will be accepted just as well as SAT anywhere. Okay, I know we're a bit over time, so we're gonna keep cruising here. So think about next steps, beginning to explore colleges. My guess is this is not the first evening you've started thinking about this, but starting to do this in a little bit of a formal way and thinking about, you know, where you might want to visit over March break is great. Like I said, registering for March SAT or April ACT, and thinking about that prep course if that might be something that's helpful for your student. Probably next week we'll send out more formal info about that prep course, timing and whatnot. The other thing that I will say about SAT versus ACT is the timing, especially in junior spring. For the SAT, there are 3. March, which is that first weekend of spring break and often overlaps with those abroad trips. May, which is in the middle of APs, and June, which is in the middle of finals. Not ideal for any of those, right? Do students make it work? Absolutely. ACT has an April test as well as a earlier May, and then a July test, of which SAT doesn't offer at all, right? So the timing ends up being a lot better for ACT, which I think sometimes is why students do better because they actually have time to study and aren't exhausted. So something to keep in mind too, thinking about those two. Schedule a meeting with me. Happy to meet one-on-one, either with, you know, just parents, guardians, or with you and your student, whatever works best for you all. Happy to do that. We can meet here, we can meet on Zoom. Just excited to chat more. And then planning for a productive summer. So like I said, lots of things to get done in the summer. A summer to-do list will come out. But thinking about visiting some schools, completing that essay, working on supplements and trying to solidify at least a core set of that college list. That's, oh, I thought that was it for me. Okay, a little bit more. So a couple of reminders, just that this process really is an opportunity for self-exploration, self-discovery, right? Students really get to dig deep and think about, oh, what do I want life to look like after Commonwealth, right? Focusing on match and fit. So that means schools that are both what the student is looking for and attainable for where they're at, you know, grades wise and academically. There are so many schools out there. Like Theo said, there are so many that our students have never heard of simply because they're not New England, right? They're a little bit farther afield, but they might be the perfect fit for your kid. And reminding ourselves and our students that really they've done the bulk of the work already. Like I said, junior year grades are the first things that get sent, right? Being an academically driven student, working hard in those classes, doing all the cool extracurriculars that they do. Now they just have to tell schools about it, right? That's the last little get it over the finish line piece. They've really done all the hard stuff already. Now I'm done.
It's a quick question.
Sure.
So we just went through this process with,
Yeah.
our oldest daughter. And we saw universities that our younger daughter probably would like to apply to.
Yeah.
Do you still recommend that we do a tour, a second tour with her, just so her name is there as a, you know, the CRM?
So that might be something to consider for over the summer, right, to visit. But that's also one time when she might reach out and say, hey, I was there, you know, last year, I really enjoyed it. And now I'm thinking about my process and I still have your school in my mind, like, tell me more, right? So that still makes a contact without flying to wherever that school is or. Right.
And you get away.
There might be a point later in the process that she says, actually, no, I really do want to go back and see for myself.
Yeah.
In which case, we'll see if we can. Other questions?
All right, one more. And is there, I know in the Navians, you kind of give a sense of how Commonwealth kids have done in their school. Do you tend to encourage certain schools more than others because of that history and, or like, how do you guide kids based on, you know, past success?
Yeah, so my approach is really to say, here's the data, right? Here's all the information we know. You can choose what you want to do with that information, right? I don't see that it's my place to like push this school or that school because I think they're going to get in here or there, but it is my duty to share that, hey, just, you know, this school is really similar to this one that you like, but I think you're going to have a better shot there, right? That's a different conversation. Does that make sense?
You don't start the process by saying, here's where kids typically love.
No, with the exception of maybe UMass Amherst as an often likely school on students' lists. You know, we get in, it's a great school, it's pretty affordable. So checks a lot of boxes. Yeah. Anything on Zoom here?
No.
Okay, we are way over, so I thank you all for your patience. I'm happy to hang out a little bit. I know, Theo, you have to run. Please say happy birthday to H from all of us. And folks on Zoom, please, I will stop sharing my screen. But please continue to utilize
Good to see
the chat.
everybody.
Enjoy the birthday.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.